There's a specific kind of silence that follows the end of a relationship with someone like that. It's not peaceful. It doesn't feel like relief, even though maybe it should. It feels more like standing in a room where something used to be. Something loud, consuming, constant, and now it's just gone. And you're left in all that empty space, wondering why the absence feels almost as heavy as the presence did. You thought leaving would feel like freedom, and maybe there are moments where it does, but then there are the other moments, the ones at 2 in the morning when you scroll back through old messages, trying to figure out what was real. The ones where you catch yourself wondering if they've even noticed, if they ever think about you, if any of it meant anything at all. And here's the thing that no one really talks about, the thing that eats at you quietly in the background of your healing. You wonder if they regret losing you. Not because you want them back, maybe you don't. Maybe you know exactly why you left, or why they left, or how it ended. But the human part of you, the part that loved them, that gave them everything, that part still wants to know, did it matter? This video is about that question. And the answer is more complicated, more psychologically layered, and more quietly devastating than you might expect. Stay with me. Here's what's strange about losing someone like this. Most breakups, even painful ones, follow a kind of emotional logic. Someone cries, someone reaches out. There's a period of raw, visible grief on both sides that at least confirms the relationship was real, that it mattered, that both people are human beings who felt something. But when it ends with a person who operates the way they do, the logic disappears. You might have expected them to fight for you, or at the very minimum to fall apart a little, to show some crack in that composed exterior, to reach out in the middle of the night the way you did, to ask questions, to want answers. Instead, nothing, or something close to nothing. Maybe a few cold messages, maybe a sudden, jarring silence. Maybe, and this one is particularly cruel, they seemed almost fine, unbothered, like you were a chapter they simply closed and moved on from. And that lands differently than regular heartbreak. Regular heartbreak hurts, but this plants a seed of doubt that grows in the dark, quietly, until it's taken up the entire space of your mind. The doubt sounds like this. Maybe I didn't matter as much as I thought. Maybe I imagined the depth of it. Maybe there's something wrong with me, something that made me easy to leave, easy to forget, easy to replace. That is not the truth. But before we get to the truth, we need to understand something fundamental about how these people are built, because their lack of visible reaction isn't evidence that you didn't matter. It's evidence of something else entirely. To understand why someone like this never seems to show regret, you have to understand the architecture of their ego. Most people have what you'd call an integrated sense of self. It's imperfect, sometimes unstable, often a work in progress, but it's real. It has room for failure. It has room for the humbling experience of being wrong. It can absorb the truth that you hurt someone, that you lost something valuable, that you made a mistake, and still survive, still continue. A person who operates with a narcissistic personality structure doesn't have that. What they have instead is a constructed self, carefully, obsessively maintained, built not from genuine self-knowledge, but from external reflection. They need the world, and specifically the people around them, to act as mirrors, to reflect back an image that confirms, I am extraordinary, I am desirable, I am not the problem, I am never the problem. That structure is not strong. It looks strong from the outside. The confidence, the composure, the way they seem untouched by things that would devastate anyone else. But underneath, it is extraordinarily fragile. It's a house of cards held together by the constant wind of other people's validation. Admitting regret would mean admitting loss, and admitting loss would mean admitting they were wrong, that they underestimated you, that they made a choice that cost them something real.
And that truth, that quiet, simple truth, is catastrophic to a structure like theirs. Think about it. If they admit they miss you, they've admitted you had value they failed to recognize. If they admit they regret how they treated you, they've admitted they were the problem. If they acknowledge the loss openly, they've made themselves smaller. And a person whose entire psychological survival depends on feeling superior cannot afford to be small, not even for a moment. So they don't show it, not because they don't feel it, but because feeling it and showing it are two completely different things for them. And showing it would require a kind of courage they genuinely don't have. Not moral courage, psychological courage, the willingness to see themselves clearly. They will choose the image over the truth every single time. It's not a decision exactly, it's a reflex. It's the only way they know how to stay intact. And so they go quiet, or they move fast. They find someone new with breathtaking speed. They perform okayness so thoroughly that it starts to look like actual okayness. And you watch from a distance, or you hear about it secondhand, and that seed of doubt grows a little more. But here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. The regret doesn't come immediately. This is important to understand, and it's one of the reasons it's so easy to believe it never comes at all. In the early days after losing you, there's something they feel, but it isn't regret. It's closer to relief. Not because you were a burden, though they may have framed it that way to protect themselves, but because the end of any relationship, especially one that had become complicated, that had started to involve your growing resistance, your questions, your quiet refusals to keep accepting what wasn't right, the end of that brings a kind of psychological release for them. No more friction, no more someone who knew them too well, no more person who had started to see through the performance. And very quickly after that relief, there's something else, the new source. Someone different, someone who doesn't know yet, someone who still looks at them with fresh admiration, who laughs at all their stories, who hasn't witnessed the cycles, who hasn't been burned by the patterns, someone who reflects back the image they need. And for a while, it works. The emptiness gets filled, the ego gets fed, life continues. This is the part that looks from the outside like they're thriving. And maybe in a surface-level way they are. But pay attention, because this is also the part where the slow machinery of realization begins to turn. It just does it quietly, underground, in a place they can't fully access or acknowledge. Because the new person, no matter how shiny and new, is not you, not in the ways that mattered. You had context, you had history. You understood the texture of who they were, their specific fears, their specific rhythms, the exact tone their voice takes when they're about to lie, and the exact tone it takes on the rare occasions they were being honest. You had seen them without the performance, maybe only in glimpses, maybe only in small, unguarded moments that they probably regretted letting happen, but you had seen it. And there's a part of every human being, even one who has spent decades building walls, that wants desperately to be truly seen by someone. Not the constructed self, the real one, the one underneath. You were one of the very few people who had ever come close to seeing that, and they pushed you out anyway. And now that part of them, the hidden, hungry part, is more alone than it's ever been, surrounded by people, more alone than ever. They didn't just lose a person, they lost the closest thing they had ever had to being known. And you cannot replace that with a new relationship. You cannot replace that with distraction. You cannot outrun it, no matter how fast you move.
Here's what's happening inside them that they will never let you see. The new relationship, or the next one, or the string of them, starts to reveal itself for what it is. Not a solution, not a replacement, not evidence that they're fine. Just another mirror, another surface, another person performing the function of validation without the weight of genuine history. And it's hollow. They can feel it, even if they can't name it. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who don't know you, who only know the version you've decided to present, who are, in a very real sense, falling for something that isn't entirely real. And some part of them knows this. Some deeply buried part registers the hollowness of it, the performance exhaustion of always being on for someone new. With you, the performance had relaxed in some ways. There was enough history, enough familiarity, that some of the armor had come down. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some. And living with that relative ease, even in a painful relationship, is different from starting over. Starting over means the armor goes back up fully, means every interaction is theater again, and that is exhausting in a way they don't have language for. So they compare. They can't help it. The new person laughs differently, doesn't understand the references, doesn't fill the silences the way you did, reacts to things in ways that feel slightly wrong, slightly off-register. And without meaning to, without wanting to, they find themselves measuring every new person against the invisible shape of you, what you understood, how you moved, the specific way you handled them in their worst moments. They don't announce this. They don't sit anyone down and say, "I keep comparing you to the person I lost." They're barely conscious of it themselves. But it seeps out in small ways, in disappointment that has no obvious cause, in a quiet withdrawal that confuses everyone around them. Something is missing. They can feel it. They don't know what to do with that feeling because they've never built the emotional tools to sit with it honestly. So they keep moving, keep replacing, keep numbing, and the missing thing stays missing. And somewhere, in a quiet moment they can't fully run from, a moment at the end of a night when the distraction falls away and the silence returns, the realization surfaces. Not with words necessarily, not with a conscious thought they could report to anyone, but with a feeling, a recognition, a low, dull ache that says, "I had something I did not understand the value of, and I let it go." They will never say this out loud, not to you, not to anyone, but they feel it. I promise you, they feel it. So why, if they feel all of this, the hollowness, the comparison, the ache, why do they never just say it? Why don't they call? Why don't they send the message that owns it, that acknowledges what they had, that says simply and honestly, "I was wrong. I lost something real. I'm sorry." This is where it gets psychologically complicated, and I want you to understand this clearly, because understanding it changes something important about how you interpret their silence. It starts with shame, but not the kind of shame that leads to growth, not the productive, motivating kind. This is a different animal entirely. This is what psychologists sometimes call toxic shame, the kind that doesn't say, "I did something bad," the kind that says, "I am something bad." For a person with a deeply wounded ego, the recognition that they genuinely hurt someone they cared about, that they threw away something valuable, that they treated you as less than what you were, that recognition doesn't arrive as a regretful, correctable thought. It arrives as a threat to their entire sense of self. If they admit they were wrong, they become the villain of the story, and they cannot be the villain. The entire architecture of their inner world is built on the certainty that they are not the villain, that they are, in fact, the wronged party, the one who was misunderstood, the one who gave too much and received too little, the one who was never truly appreciated. Admitting regret dismantles that story, and if that story falls apart, what's left? A frightening emptiness, a self without justification, an ego without armor. So the story gets protected at all costs. Whatever narrative they need to tell, that you were difficult, that it was mutual, that it simply ran its course, that they're better off, that narrative hardens into something that functions like belief. They repeat it enough that it starts to feel true. They tell their friends, and their friends reflect it back, and the echo chamber does its work, and the inconvenient truth gets buried under layers and layers of self-protective fiction. There's also fear. Fear of being seen as weak. In their world, vulnerability is not courage, it's exposure. It's the thing that gets used against you.
They learned this somewhere long before you came along, and the lesson settled deep. Showing you that you left a mark would mean showing you power, real power, and they cannot give you that, not because they don't think you deserve it, but because the act of giving it feels like surrender. And then there's something even more fundamental than shame or fear. There's simply the fact that they don't fully trust their internal world. They've spent so long outsourcing their emotional reality, measuring their worth by external reflection, defining their feelings by what's convenient rather than what's real, that when something genuine surfaces, they don't quite know what to do with it. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel familiar. So they dismiss it, redirect it, stuff it back down. The admission lives inside them, quiet and unspoken, and that's exactly where it stays. But here's what's interesting. Even when the words never come, even when the direct acknowledgement never happens, the regret still leaks out. In behavior, in patterns, in the small, often confusing things they do that seem to contradict the apparent indifference. Pay attention to this part, because you've probably already noticed some of these things and questioned whether you were imagining them. You weren't. The first and most obvious is the return. It doesn't always happen immediately. Sometimes it's weeks later, sometimes months, sometimes years. But there is a specific type of person who always finds their way back to the people they lost, not because they've changed and not because they've processed anything, but because the discomfort of the hole they left became bigger than the discomfort of returning. They come back with something resembling remorse, a gentler tone, old jokes, memories they claim they can't stop thinking about. And it can feel meaningful. It can feel like the acknowledgement you needed. But notice what they're actually offering. It's rarely a genuine reckoning. It's an invitation to return to the same dynamic, dressed up in nostalgia and just enough vulnerability to make it compelling. The regret is real. The willingness to actually change is a different conversation entirely. Then there's the watching. You know what I mean. The quiet surveillance from a distance. The viewed stories that you notice but never comment on. The mutual friends who casually mention that they asked about you. The small digital footprints that don't announce themselves but add up to something undeniable. They are paying attention. They are tracking your life from a position they've decided is safe, far enough away to maintain their pride, close enough to keep the thread. This is not nothing. This is someone who cannot fully let go of the connection, even as they refuse to reach toward it honestly. And then there's the testing, the message that seems innocent, a meme, a throwback, a random question about something you used to share, light enough to deny if they don't respond the way they hoped, weighty enough that if you do respond, it opens a door. These messages are reconnaissance. They're checking to see if you're still there, if you're still reachable, if the connection can be re-engaged on their terms, with their level of risk, and no more. And then there's something subtler, the change or the performance of change that becomes visible after losing you. The new interest they develop that was always your interest, the growth they suddenly display that looks unsettlingly like the growth you asked them for during the relationship, the therapy they mention, the reflection they perform online. Some of this might be genuine. People can change, but watch whether it's aimed at you, whether it happens in spaces you can see, whether it conveniently surfaces just as they've registered that you've started to move forward. Because real change is quiet and private. Real change doesn't need an audience, and it especially doesn't need the audience of the person they're trying to impress. All of these behaviors, taken together, tell a story. Not the story they'd tell, not the one where they're fine and you're a chapter they closed. The real story. The one where you still occupy space in their mind that they cannot figure out how to empty. Let me talk about you for a moment, because this entire time, while you've been wondering about them, whether they regret it, whether they think about you, whether any of it mattered, something has been happening to your sense of yourself that deserves attention. There's a particular cruelty in this kind of loss that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's this. They leave or the relationship ends, and you are left not just grieving a person, but grieving your own reality, wondering what was real, questioning what you gave, doubting whether the love you felt, which was so genuine, so specific, so deeply felt, was somehow misplaced, whether it reflected poorly on your judgment, whether it says something about you that you loved someone so difficult and loved them so completely.
There's a grief that comes with this kind of relationship that doesn't have a clean name. It's not just heartbreak. Heartbreak, at least, has a kind of purity to it. Two people who loved each other, something that didn't work out, a loss that both people can acknowledge. This is more tangled than that. You're grieving a person who is still alive and seemingly fine. You're grieving something that may have never been fully real, even as it felt more intense than anything you'd ever experienced. You're grieving a version of them that may have only existed in moments, the real one, the unguarded one, the one you got glimpses of, while simultaneously knowing that the version you spent most of your time with was something constructed, something performed, something designed to keep you engaged without ever fully letting you in. You're grieving what it could have been, what it almost was, in those rare moments when the walls came down. You're grieving the potential you could see so clearly, even as the reality kept falling short. And you might be grieving yourself a little, the version of you that existed inside that relationship, more anxious, more accommodating, more question-filled than you were before. The way your confidence slowly got sanded down by small moments of dismissal, by the constant recalibration of your expectations, by the subtle work of convincing yourself that needing less was growing. That grief is valid, completely, fully valid. It doesn't need to make sense to anyone else. It doesn't have to fit the template of regular heartbreak. It is its own complicated, specific thing. And part of what makes healing from it so difficult is that you can't resolve it through the other person. You can't get the acknowledgement that would help it make sense. You can't have the conversation that would tie it up neatly. They are not capable of giving you that. Not because they don't owe it to you, they do, but because giving it would require them to be someone they are not yet and may never be. The resolution has to come from inside you, which is the most unfair part. You have to grieve without their participation. You have to find the closure they are incapable of providing. You have to make peace with a story that will never have the ending you needed. But here's what I've come to understand about that. The ending you needed wasn't really about them anyway. It was about you. It was about you arriving at the knowledge that you are enough, that you were always enough, without needing them to confirm it. The moment you stop waiting for their acknowledgement is the moment the story actually ends, not with their apology, not with their regret finally made visible, but with you deciding that you no longer need it. That is the ending. That is the closure. Here's something true about people who operate this way, something that might be uncomfortable to hear, but that I think you need to know. They don't get better by watching you suffer, and they don't improve by keeping you in limbo. There is no version of you staying small, staying stuck, staying accessible that teaches them anything or helps them grow. They move on or they come back, and either way, your stagnation is not the variable that changes their trajectory. The only thing your stagnation changes is yours. So when you find yourself frozen, checking their social media, analyzing their behavior, waiting for some signal that confirms the regret is real, that you mattered, that it meant something, ask yourself what you're actually waiting for, what you're hoping that confirmation will give you that you cannot give yourself. Because I think you already know it mattered. Somewhere underneath the doubt, underneath the performance of their indifference that keeps undermining your certainty, you already know. You felt it. It was real. The love you gave was real. The investment was real. The understanding you built, the history you carried, the ways you showed up,
All of that was real. It existed. No amount of their detachment can unreal it. The question is no longer whether it mattered. The question is what you do with yourself now that you're on the other side of it. And that is a question only you can answer. But I'll tell you what I've seen happen in people who reach the other side of this particular kind of loss. They get very quiet, not in a shut-down way, but in a grounded way. They stop explaining themselves to people who aren't listening. They stop shrinking to fit spaces that were always too small. They stop performing patience for people who mistake patience for permission. They start to notice what it feels like to be in a conversation where they don't have to manage the other person's reaction, what it feels like to express a need and have it simply received, without redirection, without weaponization, without the slow, subtle work of being made to feel like needing things is a character flaw. This is part of the work, learning to trust the absence of chaos, learning that love doesn't have to hurt to be real, retraining the nervous system to associate intimacy with safety rather than uncertainty. It takes time, more time than it should have to, and there will be moments of regression, moments where the pull of the familiar is stronger than the pull of the healthy, where something about the new calm feels less alive than the old storm. But you move through it, and as you do, something interesting happens. You start to need the answer less, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started caring more about something else. Your own clarity, your own direction, the way you feel in your body when you're in a room with someone who actually sees you, the specific, particular relief of being known by someone who doesn't use that knowledge as leverage. You start to live forward, and in that forward motion, the question of whether they regret it starts to fade, not because it doesn't matter, but because it stops being the thing you orbit around. So let me answer the question you came here asking. Do they regret losing you? Yes, in their way, in the only way they are capable of. Not with the clarity and honesty and direct acknowledgement that you deserve. Not with the phone call that says everything you needed to hear. Not with the genuine reckoning that would actually mean something. But with a low, persistent ache they can't quite explain. With a comparison they can't stop making, with a return that comes from confusion disguised as longing, with a surveillance that comes from not being able to fully let go of something they didn't know how to hold when they had it. The regret is real. It is just arriving on a delayed timeline, in a foreign language, through channels they cannot control and will not admit to. And here is the part that matters most. Their regret does not change what happened. It does not undo the ways they let you down, the ways they minimized you, the ways they made you question your worth at the exact moments you most needed to feel certain of it. Knowing they regret it doesn't mean they've changed. Knowing they regret it doesn't mean going back would lead anywhere different. Their regret is theirs. It belongs to them. It lives in them, working on them in whatever way it can, quietly, underground, unacknowledged. That is their private inheritance from this relationship. Yours is different. Yours is everything you learned about what you need, what you will no longer accept, what you were willing to give even to someone who couldn't fully receive it. Yours is the clarity that only comes from surviving something that was genuinely hard. Yours is the strange, hard-won knowledge of your own capacity for love, how deep it goes, how durable it is, how it survived conditions it was never meant to survive. That is not a small thing. That is an enormous thing. You left, or the relationship ended, and you've been standing in the silence, wondering if it registered, wondering if somewhere, in some quiet moment they'll never mention, they understand what they lost. They do. They just can't tell you. And maybe slowly that can be enough. Not because you don't deserve more, you do, but because waiting for them to give you what they're constitutionally incapable of giving keeps you suspended in a story that is already finished. It keeps you in their orbit, at the edge of their gravity, organizing your life around a conclusion that may never arrive in the form you need. The story is finished. You are not finished. They are somewhere back there in the life they chose, with the walls they built, carrying the quiet weight of something they didn't know how to keep. That is their story now. It doesn't have to be yours. Yours starts with the moment you stopped waiting for their regret and started building on your own clarity. It starts with recognizing that your value was never something they had the authority to grant or revoke. It was always yours. It will always be yours. You moved forward. That matters more than whether they looked back. And if they did look back, if in some quiet moment they registered the particular, irreplaceable shape of what they lost, then that at least is something they'll carry. You don't have to carry it anymore.